Hello, everybody. Welcome to my session, Fantastic Languages and What to Learn from Them. The pragmatic programmers suggest that you choose a language to learn every year because it makes you a better programmer. It makes you think differently about the languages you already know and, of course, about the language that you are learning at the time. So we're going to talk about a bunch of languages. So for each language, I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. I'm going to say whether the creator had a beard. I'm going to show you what FizzBuzz looks like, what makes the language interesting or unique, and in what ways it has changed my thinking. And these ways do not necessarily mean they are universal for everybody, just things that came up for me. Wait, what? Beard? Yes, well, in 2008, there was a viral blog post that was talking about programming language creators and their beards and whether the language they created was popular. And they found a strong correlation. Beards make popular languages. My name is Jan. I work for Yoink, a consultancy in the Netherlands, and I'm a language nerd. Let's get started. So this one should be very familiar to you. Um, it has some properties, of course. The creator is James Gosling, and he totally has a beard. FizzBuzz looks like this. It should be familiar to all of you. But what makes it interesting to me is its focus on backwards compatibility. A program that you have compiled in Java 1 will still probably run on Java 17 without doing anything special. And that is amazing, I think. Not many languages can do that. For me personally, I created an open source project that gained some traction, and I'm talking at conferences like this one. So I got to be part of a cool community, and that's really nice. Basic is a pretty old language from the 60s. It's used for teaching. The creators are these guys, and they didn't have beards, but still the language still persists. It looks like this, and the amazing thing is that every line has a number, and you could do go to and then jump to that number, to that line, and pick up the execution from there. Even if it was inside of a loop or whatever, it would just jump there, no questions asked. Of course, we got rid of that for a good reason. Also notice the dollar signs. That means that the variable is a string type. What makes it interesting is in the 80s, there were computers that you could buy, and when they start up, you were immediately in a basic environment and could start programming right away. No fiddling with browsers or pasties or paste bins or terminals or things that you had to install. It just works. What I learned from BASIC, well, I basically learned to program in BASIC, and it was on my grandparents' MSX computer in the 80s. So English is also a familiar language to you, I suppose. It's already pretty old. Lots of native speakers. Let's just pretend it was written by this guy. He invented like 1,600 words, including the word bedroom, so that's special. And he totally has a beard. This is FizzBuzz in English, haha. And what makes it interesting is a thing called the Great Vowel Shift. So in the Middle Ages, the English started pronouncing vowels very differently from the way Europeans like me would do it. And I think that is a part of their ploy to confuse the French. What I learned from it was access to the world, basically. I can pick up a book, I can go to a conference like this one and speak to people and make myself understood, and they will understand me, and that's awesome. PHP was invented in 1995 when also Java came up and some other interesting languages. Created by this guy. He doesn't have a beard, but he did have a beard like 15, 20 years ago when PHP was more popular. So I do see a correlation there. It looks like this. Dollar signs now go in front of the variables instead of behind, and they don't mean any type. And what makes it interesting is that it just works. You can throw anything at it and it won't complain. It will just do its thing. No error, no stupid errors configuring things or upgrading or whatever. It just works. You can throw a file at it and it runs it, period. Also, in the time when I was using it, The documentation online was really, really good, way better than any other language that I used at the time. And that's really great. I think in the meantime, most languages have caught up, but PHP really was there first, and it's so important. Elm is a language that recognizes that importance. It's a functional language for the front end, created by this guy. Does he have a beard? I don't know. Is the language popular? I don't know. But it is very interesting. It looks like Haskell, and it compiles to JavaScript. What makes it really interesting is the error messages that it gives you. If you make a mistake, then the compiler will tell you very clearly, very verbosely what's wrong, and it will even give you a suggestion on how to fix the mistake. No other language does that. And what's even better is that if you don't understand the message, then they consider that a bug in the compiler and you can report it and they will fix it. What I learned from it is that even a backend fool like me can do front end. So that's cool. In Lisp, it's the oldest language in this talk. It appeared in 1958, was used for AI research at the time, and it was created by John McCarthy. And if anybody has a beard, then it must be him. This is an amazing beard, right? And the language has stuck around for decades already, so it has its popularity at least. It looks like this, lots of parentheses, but that's also what makes it interesting. The syntax is minimal. It only has parentheses, white space, and identifiers, and that's it. But the power is amazing. You can do things with Lisp that you can't do with any other language, like macros, homoiconicity. This is an amazing language to learn, a real mind bender. And that's also what I kind of learned from it. It's beautiful, it's elegant, it's undecipherable, and it's full of meaning, like this piece of Arabic calligraphy. And while we're on the subject of Arabic, let's talk about that for a little bit. It has almost as many native speakers as English. Nobody knows who created it because it's that old, but I like to think that it's, people sitting around a campfire in the desert telling stories to each other. Did they have beards? Well, we can make jokes about that, but let's not. But realize that this is a very popular language. It's the third language in the world if you look at native speakers, for example. And it looks kind of like this. This is Fizzbuzz. What makes it interesting is that Arabic does not normally write vowels, and if they do, then they are dashes and symbols on top of or below letters. And they only actually use them in children's books and in the Quran, because children still have to learn the language and have to learn reading, and the Quran is the word of Allah, and it should be immutable and not open to interpretation. And what I learned from it, or actually from this comic book that I once read, is that if Arabic looks alien to you, it probably is, but our languages also look alien to them and can be very confusing to them to learn. And that also applies to if you learn an object-oriented language, then functional languages look weird. But if you start functionally, then OO looks weird. And this is a whole new perspective that I never had before. Ruby is a scripting language, can be used for backends, also appeared in 95 and was created by this guy. I do count the beard because he read the blog post in 2008 and decided to grow a beard to make his language more popular. So that totally counts, and I think that's amazing. This is Fizzbuzz. Notice the ifs behind the statement. That's something that Ruby does. But what's really interesting is its object model. Classes can be opened to extend, like you can add a method or even modification. You can change things. And classes and objects are classes themselves, and you can change things in them. So private and public are just methods on the module class, and you can change them. You can switch the meaning of private and public. And that's crazy. Why would you do that? I don't know, but you can. What I learned from it is at the time when I was using it, there were some high profile hacks, and I think the community did not really, wasn't really mature at the time yet, and they didn't handle it very well. So a mature community around the language is really important, is what I learned. Delphi is also an old language, 1995 again, created by this guy, no beard, and the language looks like this. It's actually Pascal. And notice the dot after the end of the last end. Punctuation is important here, I guess. They don't use parentheses. I mean, they don't use braces, but they use begin and end as words. And what's interesting is that you could go into a GUI and drag and drop some elements on there and create your own GUI, and it would be just a program that could run, but you could drag and drop it together, which is really cool. It was one of the first environments that did that. What I learned from it was I needed a hash map at one time, but Delphi didn't have one, so I implemented my own, and that was a great exercise. I learned a lot from that. It was very rewarding, and I recommend that you try that too, because it's really cool. C# from the 2000s, it runs on .NET, and hey, him again. Still no beard, but it looks a lot like Java, and that's where its roots are as well, except it puts the braces on new lines, so it looks a lot more vertical. What's interesting about C# is LINQ, which allows you to write SQL-like statements inside the language, and you can use them to do SQL, of course, but also manipulations on lists and other collections, and dare I say even other monads. What I learned from it is that in the Java world we look at open source as the thing, and proprietary software is a little bit awkward, but in C# they think if you don't give the people money to support their project, how can you expect it to be around for as long as you need it? So that was a perspective, a look at things that I didn't have before as well. Proprietary software isn't necessarily bad. Typescript, relatively new. It compiles to JavaScript. It's a front-end language. It has gradual and structural typing on top of JavaScript. And hey, that's the third time we see him. Still no beard though. It looks like this. Well, actually, this is JavaScript. Now it's TypeScript. Colon number has been added on the first line. And what makes it interesting is that it added types on top of JavaScript, and it needs to support every little weird quirk that JavaScript has. And we know it has a lot of them, but still they make it work. So the type system in TypeScript is really advanced, and you could even say it more advanced than Scala or maybe even Haskell. What I learned from it is that previously, if you wanted to program in a certain language, then you better hope that your editor had support for that language, or otherwise you had to switch. But TypeScript was the first language that introduced a language server protocol, which you could put between the language and the editor. And now if your editor supports the LSP, then you can just work with that language, which means that nowadays I can even do Java in Vim, and that's really cool. I really love it. Finally, Annotation script. This is a language that works entirely in Java annotations. It was created by this weirdo. I do have a beard, so I expect this language to become really popular, and it looks like this. So let that sink in for a bit. This is a bunch of annotations, nested annotations, with at the end a Java main method that does some bootstrapping. So what makes it interesting is that in Java you can do really advanced and amazing and weird things with annotations, very powerful stuff, but nobody actually managed to create a programming language inside of it and take it to the final level. So I decided to do it instead. And actually, it is a Lisp. So everything I told you about Lisp before applies here as well. And the thing that I learned from it is that implementing Lisp is not as hard as you would think. It is actually a pretty fun exercise, and I can recommend that also to anybody who is interested. So I would say pick a language that looks interesting to you, maybe one of the languages I mentioned here, maybe another one. Pick it and start learning it and see how it changes the way you think about the language that you're currently using. That's it. Thank you very much.